Hi Hannibal.
Hey Mikkel.
We're here to talk GenAI.
Favorite topic?
Yes. Let's not make it just yet, one more GenAI podcast. So let's go a bit deep and focus on commercial operations, which is typically the part of the organization we work with, and then also focus on more complex environments, more complex companies operating in multiple countries. Some of the global blue chip companies, for example. And then finally, now being 3 years into this GenAI revolution, let's also sort of do a little bit of stock keeping here. What's working, what's not working, and where do we go from here? So I read a statistic, and there's different variations of this, that 10, 5, or 20% of GenAI projects are actually working, where 80 to 90% are deemed failures, right? In the same vein, I think you can look at sort of the hype cycle, right? We are sort of a little bit into the valley of despair right now. A lot of talk, a lot of hype, a lot of pull, but not so much actual value being generated. But that's only sort of a half-truth, at least what we're seeing. There's also a little bit of a silent revolution going on in terms of getting value from GenAI, and that's part of what we'll be discussing today. So Hannibal, maybe you can, draw up a little bit of a picture. What's going on when it comes to GenAI and commercial operations? Where are we? What's the state of play, so to say?
Yeah, definitely. I think I have a friend from university who he's working in one of these big IT consultancies, and he's working in the AI and strategy department. And there, what happens is that you go in, the senior leadership is super excited about what can we actually do with AI, what's the promise of agents. I read about it on LinkedIn, I've hear everyone talking about it, sounds like everyone is doing it, and then they go and then they ask, let's do a project together. And what ends up happening is that instead of doing a cool AI project, you do a huge data infrastructure project instead. And I think that's a little bit where, at least where we see that it can quickly go to die. Of course, there are specific data, data foundations you need to have in place, and all of that stuff. The take around it is also important. But I think what we're seeing is that the closer you can get to the functional part of it, the business side of it, is actually where you can derive a lot of value. So when we say the boring revolution and try to draw that up, that is, hey, how do we actually try to avoid at all costs here in the beginning, making this a huge data and IT project, and instead kind of more focusing on how do we get really close to the organization and build small assistants that can do narrow, specific tasks, not the agents that can do everything and can think for themselves, kind of thing. So I think that's a little bit kind of where we are. So how do we get to a low tech and boring revolution? That's what we are actually right now most excited about.
So less magic agents, more boring assistants, you might say.
Yeah, not as sexy for LinkedIn. It's not as cool a post to make, but I think it's more where reality is actually at.
And again, so we're not here to provide some sort of deep technical view on what agents can do. I'm not even in a position to do that. My reality is very much shaped by working with commercial operations, working with commercial people. Few of them are very technical by nature, but where my point of view is that it needs to look at where value is actually generated and how these people pick up these things and see value in their day-to-day life. What is sort of the difference between an agent and an assistant? And just to clean up the terminology a little bit here.
I think I'm going to preface this with also saying that I'm also not a technical expert, so kind of the exact definition of it, I think, is actually the jury is still out for that. Getting to a really, really strong definition of it. But I think in our mind, it's a little bit of a scale with the degree of autonomy being the more autonomy you give the agent, the more agentic it is, or the more agent-like it behaves. So you can give someone a relatively broad task, and they will go out and figure out what do I need to do in order to solve it, and it will figure that out for itself. That's like the more agentic it becomes, and then on the more assistant side of things, that's where you are using it for a very specific and narrow use case. So where you say, I give it less autonomy, it still needs to solve a task that couldn't be solved before without the use of large language models, but it's still a super narrow task. So what could that be? Well, it could be instead of saying, hey, do a marketing plan for the next year for our whole company. It would be, hey, I need to make this specific piece of content. It needs to be based on this video I made. Help me write the copy for that. And then you have a system that you plug it into to actually help you get more effective and efficient at what you're doing.
Awesome. Makes a lot of sense. One thing is sort of the hype train of AI, and I guess it's something we're all seeing. But what is with your reflection? What are some of the core drivers behind actually in commercial ops actually adopting AI assistance? What's the pain here? What are we solving for?
I think that the problem is maybe actually that it doesn't start with the pain. It starts with the solution in mind.
Yeah.
So you start with saying, hey, AI is cool. How can I use AI to do something? But it's actually the wrong way of thinking about it. It's taking stock in your organization, figuring out what is actually the core problems that we're facing. What are the things that we are doing on a daily basis, all the time, small things where solving it could have a huge potential either in freeing up time for sellers or freeing up time for marketers. And then figuring out, hey, is this actually somewhere where we either need to use software, like regular, plain, old, boring software to do this stuff?
AI-enabled maybe.
Maybe AI, exactly. Or is it something where we can use AI to do it? Then you kind of make a map of the world, trying to figure out what are the good use cases based on the problems you have, but not starting with the AI in mind.
And I think for me, it's also looking at the very highest sort of level, what's going on in a lot of commercial organizations. Well, what we're seeing year in, year out is, for example, on the sales rep side, they spend less and less time with customers. And I think it's all the way down now to 28% of the time being spent actually selling. Yeah. The rest is admin, preparation, all these things. They are value adding, but it's not sort of in essence what a sales rep want to do and is hired to do, which is spend time with customer. At the same time, in marketing, for example, there was done like a major sort of survey where they asked 1,800 marketeers, right? One of the by far the number one answer when they asked about, what value do you see in AI is to reduce time spent on repetitive tasks.
Yeah.
So yes, there's an agent space where we can talk about very idealized, abstract things, solve this prospecting problem or automate onboarding, whatnot. But if you look at the sort of the organization reality in a lot of commercial organizations today, there's a lot of time being spent on very repetitive, sort of boring problems.
Yeah.
But if you, in the aggregate, look at this as a bucket of work, it's a major time sink, right, and resource sink in many ways. Time we can liberate for doing things better, doing entirely new things, and and doing more meaningful things, and to a large extent, right?
And how do you kind of view how do you get closer to that reality? What's the steps that you can take as an organization to get that map of the commercial?
Yeah, and exactly. I think that should be the starting point. So, the answer becomes AI assistance. Let's get to that. But the starting point should really be, where's the time sink here, right? And it connects back to a key discussion point. Is also, where does AI sit? Do I need an AI center of excellence, and do I need a global AI strategy? And to a large extent, I actually think no. There might be some foundational things around governance, security, data, master data management, whatnot you need in place at a corporate level. But what you need in order to get value from AI is a lot of intimacy and understanding of the actual users and who you're solving problems for. So you need to get close to the people actually that you're trying to solve with and for. Salespeople, marketeers, strategists, whatever types of roles you have in your organization. And you need a pretty good map of what's going on. And that map should not just say like prospecting. No, it should be super specific. What are the actual activities, data sources, tools being used to execute prospecting in that specific setup? You need to ask yourself, of course, is prospecting meaningful and all these things as well. hopefully that is in place, but get really, really, really close to the problem and really, really close to what's going on.
Yeah.
And what you'll find out is a lot of time goes into doing what's super repetitive, mundane stuff. And there's probably going to be a lot of room to liberate a lot of that time through what we call AI assistance. And I think that's the big unlock, really, and also one of the things we're seeing already being played out. So we're seeing a lot less magical agents solving the prospecting problem in a global sort of B2B company, right? Because those companies are also special. So you see stuff on LinkedIn or read stuff in papers, which is where sort of startups are building magical agents for whatnot, but it rarely works in a very complex company with hundreds of thousands of products, very complex IT and data infrastructure, and a global presence, right? But what is left is a lot of people working in those organizations, spending a lot of time on things that could be automated through the use of GenAI, and actually often also improved, to be frank. So.
Yeah, because it gets left to the side. You can't spend enough time on making the quality right. So actually shifting your focus from creating to reviewing, validating, and improving can ultimately both make you faster, but also improve what you're actually doing. I think on the point around that the things that it can improve are sometimes mundane, everyday tasks that a little bit it can become difficult to see when you just look at a sales organization or like look at prospecting as a whole. What are actually the small things, or whatever it is, right? And I think the thing that can be helpful, which can seem a little bit weird, is actually to say, hey, let me follow my sales reps for a couple of days. Let me be together with them on sales calls. Let me look at how they do prospecting. Let me kind of be super close to them, basically standing behind them and looking at what they do every day, because that's where you can actually uncover some of those interesting insights into where could we do small things, boring things that would actually help move the needle in our commercial operations.
And that's why I think, AI assistants in the end are not like engines of innovation. It is mostly an efficiency and efficiency play, sorry. Building AI assistants is to a large extent logging in today's processes. You can also reinvent those processes, but they will not be able to do that. They do not come with extensive strategic imagination, right? So they work within very set boundaries, framework, practices. And of course, if you still have a lot of data depth and all these things that they still rely on, it's also going to compound when you start to deploy these assistants. But I also want to say what they do well is they're typically low tech. And why is that important? That's important because we want to get close to the function. So we'll get back to ownership and scaling and all these things in a few minutes. But I think a really, really key premise for this is get close to the function, get close to the users when it comes to ownership and developing these. It's the distance between a sales rep operating somewhere in Romania to a global IT organization, right? It's very, very long. So that alone will break the whole thing, right? So we need to get closer to the sales rep in Romania in many ways. And keeping them low tech allows for that, to be frank. But of course, keeping them low tech and to a large extent also not that agentic in many ways also has some limitations. So it's also very important to be clear about what they can do and what cannot do. They cannot solve for complex workflows with a lot of interactions and so on. It is, the way we see it is the definition of an assistant is like solving very specific tasks in a narrow sense and based on a very set range of rules, boundaries, and practices, right? But again, if it sits close to the user, it also allows for a lot of great things that we'll come back to in a few minutes, of course. So I think that's the key premise of this paper. And what we're also seeing is actually this reality is playing out. It does not call for fancy prices or fancy papers even or anything that's that sort of makes the headlines, but it's a very slow and boring revolution that can mean a massive unlock for organization if you do it in a proper and systematic way as well.
Yeah, and the reality is it's not to it's not to point fingers, but sometimes when you're out speaking to users, right, at the user level, speaking to them, they are starting to use. Maybe they know where the Copilot button is on their computer, but maybe they don't. Right, they're not using it. So it's kind of the boring revolution also entails getting more people involved and more people on board, getting them to a place where they can comfortably use AI to do their everyday jobs faster and better. Which is the kind of, we're talking a lot about assistance here, which is where you define a narrow use case and do something. But there's also the whole kind of enablement piece of it, getting users equipped and ready to use it for all of their work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to that point, a part of the boring revolution is that it also allows for much wider adoption than if you create very sophisticated tools that requires high level of AI fluency.
Yeah.
So again, it's a premise of this whole boring revolution that it should not be difficult to use.
Yeah.
Because that's how we get the 70 to 80 to 90% adoption. Yeah. If you create sophisticated solutions that are just, I don't even want to say difficult to use, but slightly difficult to use, you're building it for the 10 or 20% that have sort of higher AI fluency. So a design criteria for this revolution is, for you to go wide, you need to go simple in many ways. Yeah. And that is, I think, that's the slow and boring revolution. Why is it interesting right now? It's because it's actually happening. It's not just the hype train. It's not just talk or ideas or concepts. It's actually happening. But I also do want to say that we're also seeing a lot of it stalling, right? So it becomes like a grassroots thing where some parts of the organization in a structured or unstructured manner starts to play around with different types of AI assistants, whether it's about buying software that has AI capabilities, building custom GPTs and whatnot. There is, of course, also a tendency to things to stall a little bit when it comes to really going enterprise grade and getting wide adoption in your organization. You need both those things to really see the big unlocks for your organization in terms of productivity or whatever you're looking for.
And on that whole, how do you ensure how do you get to wide adoption? Right. One part is making a lot of narrow assistants that can help you do a specific job. Another part is enabling the grassroots both to iterate with the assistants, but also just do their kind of the more general use of LLMs in their work. And then there's the last part, which is something that I'm really excited about, which is the whole part where you actually remove the user knowing that something is done by AI.
Yes.
Where you embed it into their workflow as a part of their daily tasks. What could be an example of that? One of the things could be that you do in your CRM system, right? You have a lot of data and records that are structured in a lot of different places, but you have it all there. When a sales rep has to look at a new lead that comes through the door, maybe it's related to an existing account, maybe there's a project already going on an opportunity on that account. Instead of that sales rep having to go in and look at all these different relationships, what we can do now is that we can just, send all of the relationships, those records, to an OpenAI API call and ask you to say, hey, this is a new lead for a sales rep in this organization. These are all the different records that's related to it. Please make a summary of what's going on with this, what's important to know. And thereby the sales rep is by definition, using AI every time he encounters a new lead in the system and has to work it. But he's not thinking about it. It's working in the background.
Yes.
And that's the beautiful. That's when it really gets beautiful.
And I think there is a couple of pillars to that from grassroots to scale revolution, right? Yeah. And I think it's a very meaningful place to start, because again, AI assistants not sophisticated in terms of what is required to build them. What is difficult is to get to a scalable setup, and we can just unbundle that. One thing that you see often is also when you start to get this grassroots sort of some parts of the organization and commercial organizations are starting to toy with these different applications. Is one thing you need to be very aware of when building assistants that you want to release into the wild and work across the organization is you need to make sure that they are built on sort of a robust methodology and guardrails, right? Because one thing is going to AI and asking it to develop a value proposition. I upload some technical information, develop value proposition. Mm-hmm. The thing is just agreeing on what a value proposition actually is, what a great one entails, and being able to judge whether one is just lukewarm or great is actually quite difficult. So building that methodology, terminology, and the sort of best practices is extremely important. So yes, technologically not super sophisticated, but make sure your assistants are built on really good guidance, to be frank. That allows you to manage what good looks like, of course, in a central way, but also make sure that everyone worked in a harmonized way across some of these key tasks that we're solving for. So that is extremely important. And then I think to your point, Hannibal, making it accessible where people work. Mm-hmm. It's so almost lame and stupidly mundane, right? Mm. But what you don't want is a lot of different logins, platforms, and again, all those things just add complexity. For a person with high AI literacy, high sort of digital literacy, not a problem. But we want to make it as easy and accessible as possible. So again, do we need to talk about AI? Not necessarily. It can also just be a capability that is added to an existing system, CRM systems. Whatever open lines they have in Teams or Slack, or maybe they just get an email with meeting notes prior to having a meeting that is auto-generated, right? So make it as accessible as possible where people work. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is when you go from grassroots to scale is to make sure you have proper ownership and governance. And that's one of the more tricky things, right? It's pretty easy to play around and create different types of assistance for different tasks. And you don't even have to be a super user of any of these platforms, right? With a little bit of technical acumen and a little bit of curiosity, you can get pretty far. The tricky part is, okay, now we're doing it for a 120-person marketing organization. How do we make sure that we have strong ownership of these different agents so it's not just totally mushrooming across the organization? How do you instill governance around managing these? You will ongoingly need to assess whether to introduce new ones. You will need to manage, prune, and optimize the ones you have. And you might even need to sunset certain AI assistants that are not generating any value at all, right? So it's an ongoing, you need to build some sort of ongoing mechanism and governance model that allows you to prune these centrally. That doesn't mean everything needs to be built in a central hub or so, but there needs to be some sort of oversight and governance set up in order for you to go from grassroots to scale solution.
It is as you say, right? It's if you accept that this is something that needs to be in the business together with the functions, then you also need to have a way to centrally manage it, create the guardrails around it, but let the power be in the functions. So when we talk about that, what are the ways that you can actually ensure that you anchor it in the right way when you want to scale it? What are some of the things to keep in mind? If you are, I think we're mostly talking about the large enterprises operating multiple markets.
Yeah, I think there's a few extra points to keep in mind also when scaling something like this, right? You need some sort of portfolio thinking. So in the sense that you constantly prune this portfolio of assistants, but also constantly work with the frontline, the actual users, the ones close to the action, so to say, to provide input to potential use cases. This cannot be done in an ivory tower or as a project alone. It needs to be an ongoing mechanism, similar to like managing a portfolio of technologies or similar. Building new features, sunsetting certain ones, maintaining others, and stuff like that. So that's extremely important. So you need that portfolio and product thinking actually when it comes to building these assistants. And then I think a fifth, sort of a final pillar before we go into the organizational setup, which is also important, is the whole empowerment and change management piece, which is actually something that is extremely important. Again, sort of a design criteria for this whole revolution is that it has wide adoption baked into it. So we need to make sure that we need to get plus 50 adoption of these assistants. And how do you get there? That's really not just about building these assistants. It's about bringing people in at the right time, creating forums for knowledge exchange and curiosity, but also psychological safety about some of the difficult things. You will have things operating in the background that you don't necessarily consider as a commercial sort of a chief commercial officer, similar people being afraid about losing their job. People lacking simple IT skills that are holding them back, inertia, different drivers that will all be sort of hampering adoption rates, right? Skill lags and whatnot. So you need to be constantly working to break down these different barriers, whether it's mental, skill-based or whatnot, and be really keen on getting ambassadors and super users in place that can also act like a sparring partner and a champion in rolling out some of these things. So it's not just quote unquote top down. Hey, let's build some AI assistants, release them into the wild, and they will organically be picked up. I think another thing that's extremely important is leadership support, right? Making sure that leaders also constantly encourages use of AI to release time for and resources for more meaningful, more strategic things that we can see in the data that people would actually like to have a lot more time to do. So it's sort of a mix of different change management levers that needs to be really considered. Also something like training. So make sure don't just release things, but also make sure that people are actually trained and enabled to be able to use these things.
What would you say the best leaders can do? Like if you are a leader in a comics organization or marketing organization, how do you kind of how do you lead that team into that kind of untouched waters or new waters? How do you do that?
I think it starts with attention and sponsorship, constantly calling out how an important imperative it is for this organization to master these things. And then some people will sort of be naturally hesitant and say, oh, it's just about making me redundant and whatnot. And hopefully it's not just about firing people, but it's actually about empowering people. So that's a clear premise also for the assistant revolution. An assistant is not akin to a virtual colleague. It cannot just replace a marketing manager. It's a tool.
Yeah.
And I think that's the realistic view that is also comes with this boring revolution, that we're introducing a set of tools enabled by GenAI, but they're no way autonomous, nowhere capable, not in any way capable of replacing any people. But it provides some superpowers to the people that actually use them. So I think sorry my language, so simple in many ways, right? How do you talk about this? Yeah. If it comes across about something about redundancies, automation, elimination, those types of words don't really appeal that much. But of course, I would also encourage individuals to start picking these up. I have not met a sales or marketing organization that is just getting more and more resources and tasked to do even less. Most of them get less, get higher targets, and are asked to do even more. So as an individual, you also need to figure out, okay, how do I deliver on all those three imperatives at the same time?
Yeah.
And this is actually really one of the things that can actually make a difference, right?
Yeah.
And or you can also just choose to work yourself to death trying to fight off these forces, right?
Yeah.
Which is not really an answer. So I think there's a really positive spin to it, especially within this assistant domain, assistance approach, where it's not really about eliminating people, it's about empowering them. So I believe narrative and how you frame it means a lot, actually. Yeah. Then there's practical support in, either building it into compensation models or
setting aside time for it.
Setting a time for it, putting the spotlight on success stories and giving a little bit of, praise when needed, building up different forums where they can share experience and so on. But it really starts with how you frame it, and back to the fact that it's about empowerment, not elimination of people. I think is extremely important. But there's a second layer. This was sort of very tangible levers, right? Working with the AI assistants and whatnot. Hannibal, what about when it comes to the organizational piece, right? Because we've seen different scenarios play out where companies are setting up centers of excellence within AI, or leaving the whole AI thing, quote unquote, with IT because it's framed as an IT and data issue, right? If you buy into the idea of these assistants and you really wanna, make this happen in your organization as a commercial leader or some marketing leader, whatever role you're in, how should you set up your organization?
I think we touched upon it earlier in our conversation, but it's the funny thing with LLMs, right, is that it's language models. So on a not that I'm technical, but on a technical note, it's interesting that what they get, how they learn stuff when you're using it, is you giving it the right context to do something. That's how they learn. So in kind of built into how the foundational technology works is that you need to understand the context of what you're doing extremely well. And who understands that context? Well, it's maybe you have an outstanding IT department that knows marketing in and out, but probably not, right?
But they're also working with procurement. They're also working with supply chain.
Exactly, right. They need to know a lot of things. So where does this context lie? It lies in the specific functions where you're trying to solve a specific task with that person who knows what a good value proposition looks like, as an example. I can validate the output. I know how to give it the right direction as if it was an actual assistant sitting next to me, right? I can give it the task in the right way.
And you're able to judge whether the output is good or bad, and
exactly. And then kind of you can accept that. So there is like the business side of it where you need to give it the right context. Then there is also something about understanding how to instruct LLMs, how to use it in workflows, how to give it the right data, how to do all of those things that are a little bit of a different type of skill set. So I think when we think about it, there is the insider knowledge lives in the functions, but we kind of believe that the model right now is to have a sort of AI deployment team. So someone that can speak to users and have them kind of provide input and understand their problems and kind of understand how do they actually, what is a good value proposition, and then they help them deploy it into the organization with AI. So they are working together with the functions, but focusing on deploying AI.
And they could also do the portfolio management, keep the oversight of the many assistants, hopefully, that we're building, help prune that portfolio of assistants, and also make sure some of the baseline stuff around security and all these things are
working together with IT from the side, so kind of facilitating that those support.
And whether they are dedicated to the sitting in IT and dedicated to the function or sitting in the actual function, I'm not so sure is that important. But I think there's something about that this deployment team sits close to the function and works solely with the function. Again, if we put it on this team to understand the specific tasks, workflows, and all these things for all functions within the company, it becomes all-encompassing, and they lose that intimacy with the users. So we want that intimacy right. What is then the role of corporate IT and these different actors?
I think that the corporate functions have a role to play. Of course, what we've been arguing for all along is that we should minimize the role that they play in how you do it. So, of course, with IT, for example, in one of the clients that we work with, their IT has made basically an instance of a chatbot with a RAG database or a RAG into all the company knowledge. So they have a place where they can work with agents in a secure manner, where they can do stuff themselves, create agents, but within kind of the guardrails of both having the right security, the data, they're not sending it to third parties and stuff like that. So I think that there IT can play the role of an enabler to say, hey, we know that this is really important. We want to have some sort of control in how this gets deployed, but we also want to provide the flexibility of you being able to create stuff. So that's where IT comes in. For legal and compliance, I think those are functions where if you are, for example, creating press releases or whatever it might be at a larger scale, we have some customers who does that. AI can be really good, but there might be some compliance and legal stuff that you need to have as kind of a yes/no paths in a decision tree, where you need to figure out how do I then include them in that process, so we ensure that the stuff that we send out to customers is compliant and we're not overstepping on any kind of legal stuff. Where you probably don't know that in the function, or you need someone else to help them. Yeah. What anything I missed here, or anything you?
No, I think it's also exactly that type of work. So maybe it becomes more of an enabler and setting some high level guardrails, but the value creation, use cases, these things sits in the function. And I think another thing is when you zoom in on this AI deployment team you alluded to before, how does that team actually look, right? First of all, you need to commit, right? So you need to figure out, as a commercial leader, maybe you're managing a sales team of 10, of 100 to 200 people. You have maybe a RevOps team or some different staff functions supporting that team, however you're set up. Do you place that AI deployment team within that team or under that leader, created as a separate team or whatnot? It's not so. I don't think that's an interesting discussion. I think it's more interesting to look at what are then the capabilities and roles you play in that, you put in that team. It's not just enough to hire a person and call that head of commercial AI. It's a all-encompassing job, right? So you need to break it down a little bit and understand what are then the sub-tasks or sub-responsibilities that should sit with that team. And I see some different roles that you need to consider, and some of them can be maybe collapsed into one person. Depends on that person and how many resources you have available, right? You probably need some sort of product owner, pruning, managing, sunsetting, creating new AI assistants. That requires a product ownership mindset. Is it a full role or not? Let's park that, but you need a product ownership skill set somewhere in that organization. Then you also need these embedded AI specialists, to your point. Sometimes even an assistant can require simple integrations, right? Maybe you need to set up an email client based on the data you're getting out of your CRM system or whatnot. So simple integrations will need to be in place, and there is a bit of technical work. We cannot get out of that, and that's also totally fine. So you need some embedded AI specialists that mostly come from a sort of a technical angle. And then I think a third pillar that is extremely important is the whole adoption and training agenda. So do you have a person that goes to work and is measured on the organization's ability to pick up, use, and get value from these assistants? I would isolate that and let that sit either with a person or build up a virtual additional layer to the organization where someone's go to work and cares about whether these things get picked up and are used in a proper way to generate value for the users. And then you need to, of course, consider how to bring in the rest of the commercial organization. Again, this is your sales reps or your marketing managers, whoever is the beneficiaries of these different assistants. And that's also extremely important because none of the people in the deployment team is going to be so close to the use cases that they all understand all the ins and outs. So you need to get a mechanism in place that allows you to bring in the users in the right way, whether it's through innovation jams or you have some sort of super ambassadors that are brought into and have a little bit of a moonlight job as part of a committee that nominates new AI assistants or nominates as assistants that should be changed or sunsetted, right? So this champion network idea, for example, right? So there is an important link also needed to go all the way down to the actual users that sits out in the sort of the veins of the organization. That's where magic happens, and that's why it needs to be close to the function. So figuring out how to organize and set up the organization, set up some different modes of operation around this whole thing is extremely, extremely important to turn it from a project to an ongoing system that allows you to get value out of AI assistance in a proper way.
Yeah.
So that's also a reflection, I'd say.
Cool. But I think we're probably closing up on time. Is there what do we want to leave?
Now, I think a good way to also look at this is to, how do you actually get going with this? If you buy into the notion of this is really not about building these magical agents. Again, we're operating in very complex IT and data environments. That's a premise for this global organization. We believe in the idea of these assistants as a useful tool to empower our people. How do we actually get going? A key premise to start out with understanding where does the value sit, to your point. Get really close to the use cases. Get really, 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 really close to the use cases. Not in abstract terms, but specifically, where's the value? Where's time's being spent? How is it wasted? How are we doing it today? What would be a better way? How do we get solution in place that could solve for that? And that could easily leave you with plus 20 different assistants that you would need to build. Then building in a mechanism of testing and of course pressure testing these hypotheses before you go to scale. So pilot these different assistants take your product owner setup and whatnot, get close to users, let them shadow people, sit with users as they use these different assistants, learn from that experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, bring that back, and then begin to look at how to scale. And that is really about setting up the organization, setting up the processes, setting up the governance, setting up the tracking of adoption, all these mechanisms that need to be in place in order for us to go from, okay, now we build a few agents, they are at the face of it, not agents, sorry, assistants, at the face of it, they are valuable. How do we build an ongoing sort of a system that allows us to both improve but get more and more value for the different things?
And on the scaling part, I think one of the things that's important is that you find a way or mechanism to prove the business value that you're creating. Because a lot of times you end up saying, this is cool, useful, maybe it works, they're adopting it. But actually measuring, are we more effective? Are we saving sales rep time? Do we have a higher hit rate on the prospects that we have because we prioritize them right? Trying to early on when you build out when you have the use case, also try to build out what is actually the business logic for us investing in this.
Yes.
How are we going to do impact tracking on this specific assistant that we are building, so we can prove to the organization this is something that we should do more of.
Absolutely. That's why you shouldn't only track adoption. You should also track, are we then actually realizing value? And that's part of that building that system. But it of course entails in the first place that you have an idea about what's the business logic of doing this thing. So you're totally right. And then turning it into again a continuous engine that keep optimizing itself. So each assistant gets better and better as we use it more and more and learn what works, what doesn't work. We are constantly introducing new ones because we're finding new pockets of value creation, and we're sunsetting those that we are not using. And we're continuously working on adoption and value realization as an ongoing agenda. So it's not a project. That's how you get going, right? I would say.
And a little bit of an aside to what can it mean to find an assistant that can continuously improve over time. One of the things that I've built, a simple assistant is for a company that gets a lot of inbound requests for products. Like, I want this product, when can you deliver it? It's like project based. So what we do here is that whenever you get a request in, we capture the request and we generate an answer based on old answers in the system. So it generates the answer, and then it's automatically drafted in the sales rep's outbox. So they will have a draft when they wake up, and say, hey, there's a customer that wrote me, and I have a ready draft that I can look at and send. You also capture what they actually sent. So if it makes edits to that message, hey, this is actually not right, I want to change it to this. Now you can also see what did we generate from the assistant and what did we actually send. And now we can start to understand over time.
There's a feedback loop.
There's a feedback loop.
Yeah.
So if you can build in feedback loops in the systems that you create, it's super strong because it actually learns and becomes better over time. So that's one of the kind of ways to think about continuous improvement.
Absolutely. And I think you're spot on. That's one of the key use cases, right? And there's so many use cases, and we could do a separate episode on that. But coming back to these simple things that are typically a time drain, could be done in a better way, maybe. We get sloppy because it's boring and nobody wants to do it. But they're all over the place. From translations to content creation to prospecting to drafting standardized proposals, whatnot. They are all over the place. And that's really coming back to the key idea of this podcast and the paper, the boring revolution. Finding those pockets of value, building something useful, low-tech, that empowers people to do a better job. But as it is, the idea of the assistance is also that there's always going to be a human in the loop. There's no full autonomy here. That's of course a strong caveat. Hence the empowerment, not the elimination of certain people.
And I think that's just when we have the conversation, that is the bitter reality right now.
Yeah.
Right. We're also open for the fact that this can change.
Yes.
We can see that the rate of change is maybe slowing down a little bit, but there's still happening so much. A lot of investments in additional compute power for training and stuff. So, we are open to make a completely new paper in half a year or in 3 months where we have a new perspective, but this is just what we see happening right now.
And that's a very important caveat of the whole conversation. This is the slow and boring and real revolution. Yeah. And that might change a year or 2 or a half year down the line. But this is here. It's feasible. Yeah. It's impactful if done in the right way. And it makes, I think, the benefits of GenAI tangible and accessible for a lot of organizations. So, thanks for taking the time, Hannibal. So you do a lot of work in the space and build a lot of these assistants. So thank you for sharing your perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you have any questions or requests, you can always contact us at info@quadrant.dk. If you want to know more about Quadrant Consulting, please be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our newsletter, or go to our website quadrant.dk.